Folks, meet the new XPS 15 9500. This is one of the first notebooks that we've ever considered to be a true hybrid. Basically, it can do pretty much anything, with asterisks, of course. You see, this one was a bit difficult to evaluate against the competition because if you look at the majority of the notebook content that we publish on the channel, most of them are catered towards gamers because they are gaming laptops in the first place. And so when I switched over to the XPS 15, I almost wondered, like, is this thing a productivity device or a gaming notebook or an ultra portable laptop? Like, it could be all of those things, but it also could be none of them at all. Dell has focused really hard on reducing noise to make the XPS 15 really easy to live with, so that means there are going to be some performance sacrifices. But does that make it the perfect all-around notebook, or does the jack-of-all-trades approach also make it a master of none? Well, it's pretty expensive, so Dell needs to get a lot of things right, but I do have some concerns as well, so let's talk about that after a quick message from our sponsor.
The new Galahad all-in-one coolers by Lee & Lee, combining premium materials for a beautiful package to cool your Intel or AMD CPU with black or white color options available, both with tasteful aluminum housing and complementing 120mm ARGB high static pressure fans, and you gotta appreciate proper length fan screws. The water pump is excellent with easy installation, cool pattern with vibrant lighting, controlled with the hub or via your motherboard, and rotatable housing to match your orientation, and don't forget the aluminum magnetic cap for a different look. Check out the new Galahad all-in-one coolers by Lee & Lee down below.
Alright, so before I get into my full review, I definitely have to talk about some of the issues that users have been experiencing with the current XPS 15. If you go onto Reddit or YouTube, you can find some of the issues. For example, there's been problems reported with the trackpad not registering clicks, and my friend's randomly turned itself off every few minutes or so, and so he had to return it. I've also seen a lot of negative feedback about the screen's auto brightness feature and the fingerprint sensor not working after the notebook wakes up. The sample that I have over here is from a later batch, and I haven't encountered any of those. But with that being said, let's start with the price. The base model retails for $1,250, and for that, you get a Core i5 processor, 8 gigs of RAM, a 256GB SSD, no discrete graphics, and a 1080p or a 1200p IPS 500 nit display. If you want a discrete graphics card, you'll have to step it up to the Core i7 model and a 1650 Ti for about $1,650 US. The sample that we have in hand comes with twice the memory, twice the storage, the same GPU and the display, and it goes for about $1,850 US. That's expensive, but when you look at the overall package, it's actually not too bad. Now, Mike and I have been using this thing for the past couple of weeks, and he's drooling all over it. He loves everything about this machine, and I guess I can sort of fall into that category because there are a lot of reasons to like the XPS 15. And I'm gonna kick things off with the design and build quality. It's an absolute masterpiece, guys. If you recall watching my XPS 13 review, I was raving about the incredible craftsmanship by the engineering team over at Dell. It is the gold standard for what an ultrabook should be. Well, if I switch gears to the XPS 15, think of it as a supersized XPS 13 without making any compromises. So that means you're getting a robust hinge that doesn't wobble. You can also open the lid with just one hand, and unlike the XPS 13, the lid is magnetic, so you don't have to worry about that gap between the lid and the main body. However, I did notice that the middle section doesn't stay flush, but that's just me being picky. The interior space is a breath of fresh air. Having used a variety of gaming notebooks, you're getting a standard layout, which I'm sure a lot of you would appreciate. Dell has made the keys bigger compared to last year's model. The power button acts as a fingerprint reader. The keys feel excellent. There's a good amount of travel distance, so they don't feel shallow. They're way better than my Razer Blade 15 Advanced because you get proper feedback. I love the font choice. I think Dell has utilized the space efficiently, especially with the arrow keys and the shift keys. There is one thing that bothered me just a little bit, and that is the backspace key on my sample felt a bit loose compared to the rest of the keys. But other than that, it's a fantastic keyboard. It's also LED backlit, and I didn't have any problems viewing it at night. The cherry on top of this is the carbon fiber inspired palm rest. I think Dell has nailed this in terms of giving users a superior, comfortable typing experience. It just feels like pillows for my palms. I'm not sure if that made sense, but this is one of my favorite features of the XPS 15. Now, moving on to the trackpad. It's big. It's really big, guys. It's bigger than my Razer Blade 15. It's the biggest trackpad that I've ever encountered on a Windows notebook. And it's amazing. You've got a glass surface with support for Windows drivers. The finger navigation is just super smooth. It's very responsive. I loved using this trackpad every single day. Now, my sample did not have any of those wobbling issues that other users have reported. So take that for what it is. So that's why I really enjoyed it. Now, there is one thing that I do have to point out, and that is the middle click, because the primary left and right buttons are integrated and they do sound really good. Here's a quick sound test. So it's really nice. The only thing is that there is a middle click that basically has no function. It's kind of like a dead zone. So if I'm trying to drag and drop files from my Explorer to the desktop, it doesn't work out. So definitely keep that in mind. Personally, I think that the trackpad might be a little bit too big, but hey, if it's a bigger trackpad, if that's something that you're looking into, this is great. And palm detection was also really good too, so that's awesome. This is the webcam test. Now, I've recorded this thing probably like 5 or 6 times because randomly there is some crackling noise happening in the background with my vocals. In some cases, in some of my recordings, I didn't notice any of them, but in other cases, I did notice some of them. So it might be present in this recording or it might not. I'll see if I can roll a clip. This is the webcam test on the XPS 15. The video quality is not really the greatest compared to some of the other notebooks that I've encountered. And I'm not really sure what's up with that, but it's definitely something to keep in mind when you plan on using this thing for business meetings or casual conversations over Skype or Zoom. Now, the speakers on the XPS 15 were amazing. Guys, I legit watched Netflix for hours on this thing, and I didn't really have the need to plug in my headphones or an external set of speakers on this laptop because they were great. There's proper stereo separation or stereo imaging because you've got 2 front-facing speakers with great projection. There's also speakers on the side as well, and you also get a bit of bass response. The trebles don't sound harsh. Honestly, this is a fantastic multimedia machine. Moving on to the display. Man, oh man, this is yet another area where Dell hit a home run. Just like the XPS 13, the XPS 15 has shifted to a 16:10 aspect ratio. Typically, you'd find notebooks with a resolution of 1920 by 1080, but in this case, you get an extra 120 pixels vertically, so that will give you more room to work with in applications, which is really nice. It's an IPS display, and as we ran our display analysis test, I was blown away by how color accurate it is. It covers 100% sRGB, 81% Adobe RGB, and 88% DCI-B3. I was watching some of my old videos on the channel and I compared it to my 4K BenQ display, and guys, I couldn't tell a difference. This is like a dream panel for creators like myself because I can comfortably edit videos, photos, whatever it is. Not to mention, it's also a really bright display. It gets as far as 500 nits, so you can take this thing outdoors without a problem. You can also opt for a slightly color accurate 4K option, but I prefer the 1080p or the 1200p display because it's matte and I just prefer having that non-reflective display over something that's glossy. The I/O is unfortunately an area where you'll need to make compromises because you're not getting a whole lot of options. So on the left-hand side, you get a Kensington lock and 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports. Switching to the left, you get an audio jack, a full-size UHS 3 card reader, and a USB 3.1 Type-C port. So here's where I stand with the port situation. I completely see what Dell's doing here with the current XPS lineup. The XPS 13 doesn't have a lot of I/O. The XPS 15, it's all mostly USB-C, and I think they're trying to future-proof their lineup for the next generation of accessories. But if you look at the current situation, there's not a lot of accessories that come with USB-C wireless adapters or USB-C cables if you want to connect other accessories. You'll definitely need a Type-A port, which surprisingly you can use because they do include this USB-C hub that comes with a full-size Type-A port and a full-size HDMI port. So that's something. I guess it's a lifestyle change that you'll sort of have to adapt, but unless and until if you absolutely need USB Type-A for everything that you do, maybe it's not the right time to switch. In terms of upgradability, this laptop surprised me for its form factor. As you can see, you've got 2 RAM slots that can be accessed right over here. Maximum supported memory is 64 gigabytes. The primary NVMe SSD is right over here, and there's an extra M.2 slot for storage expansion, which is awesome. But interestingly, they don't provide any screws for mounting that second drive. So Dell, I don't know what's up with that. The primary NVMe SSD is fast, guys. It's the fastest that we've ever come across on a notebook, both in terms of read and write performance, especially on a notebook this thin. Dell's Power Manager is a really deep program that's worth a while to check out, but it could actually be a bit too complicated for most everyday users. You can select when the battery is most likely to charge, which extends battery life. Peak shift allows you to manage when charging happens, so you can lower your consumption during peak times when the utility may charge more for electricity. Thermal management is more about comfort than anything else. For example, both cool and quiet modes prioritize surface temperatures by using a network of sensors Dell has placed through the chassis. The XPS can then increase the speed of either one of its fans or both to reduce temperatures in areas that would most affect you, for example, in the palm rest area and keyboard. Now, how does that translate to battery life? Well, this is again a solid win for the XPS 15. During our light load test, this laptop lasted for more than 16 hours, and it's by far the longest lasting notebook within this caliber, which is just amazing. When I switch over to the heavy load test, it does take a bit of a hit, lasting for about only an hour and 11 minutes. I guess this is a good time to move on to some temperature results, starting with the surface heat. And it looks like Dell's doing exactly what they promised. The keyboard area only gets to around 52 degrees Celsius at its hottest point, even with the system under full load. It's also nice to see all the hot air going out the back, so your mouse hand or lap isn't going to get too toasty. Heat on the bottom chassis is also really well managed here. Just to give you some idea of how cool this thing runs, the top and bottom temperature hotspots on the XPS are a good 10 to 15 degrees lower than many of the other notebooks that I've reviewed. Considering how slim it is and the kind of specs this thing's running, that's seriously impressive, guys. And how does that translate to noise? Well, at idle, the XPS 15 is dead silent, and even under full load, when the fans are spinning at higher RPMs, it's still one of the quieter high-performance notebooks around. But what does all that focus on surface temperatures and reducing noise mean for overall performance? Well, let's check out clock speeds over time, and I'm going to go a little more in depth here and compare the XPS 15 to the MSI GS66, another notebook that uses the Core i7-10750H processor. Starting off with CPU temperatures under a full Maya workload, and like every other Intel-based notebook, the first 10 minutes or so of the test sees a spike to 100 degrees. Then there's a real quick dip down to a more manageable temperature of between 80 to 85 degrees until the end. The odd thing is, even when hitting the 100-degree peak, the XPS fans don't seem to have an aggressive enough profile. So even with the CPU sitting near its thermal limit, they just sat there and didn't increase their speed until the 66-second mark. You can also see that at other times, fan speeds dropped off and that caused temperatures to rise again. Either way, they stayed below the GS66 Stealth from MSI. The clock speeds stayed below the MSI notebook as well, by a good 300 MHz, and they aren't nearly as stable either. There's frequent dips to under 3 GHz, and those line up perfectly with those areas where temperatures started to increase. So I guess that's a sacrifice that you need to make for a notebook that's quiet and runs pretty cool. A lot of the temperature and clock speed modifications are being controlled by changing the i7-10750H's input power on the fly. I mean, sure, it starts out pretty high, but then Dell's algorithms cut back to just 47 watts, with a few areas lowering to only 40 watts. This is actually right in line with Intel's configurable TDP numbers, so it's not like we're seeing throttling here. As a matter of fact, this is more in line with how the CPU should behave, whereas MSI seems to have their GS66 Stealth configured to the upper end of Intel's spec. Moving on to actual performance results, and because of the XPS 15's initial bursts of high speed, shorter tests like Cinebench, we see it edging out the MSI GS66, but that's not really what happens in the real world. So as the tests get longer, we get to see a lot more realistic territory with longer processing workloads. And here's where the XPS 15 falls further and further behind. But that doesn't mean it's slow. This is still a super fast notebook for its size. As a matter of fact, it's between 50 to 75% faster than a similarly sized thin and light notebook like the ZenBook 15 that I tested just a few months ago. So it's all about perspective. Meanwhile, the discrete GTX 1650 Ti gives some pretty decent performance uplifts in Adobe Premiere and Resolve, which is good news for anyone who wants to use the XPS 15 as a portable rendering machine. Also remember, the rest of the notebooks in these charts have much higher end GPUs too. WinRAR shows some respectable performance too, which will be pretty important for people who need to quickly load or process files from their internal drive. And now on to gaming. Now, before I get into the results, I do want to emphasize something very important. This laptop is not designed for gamers. In fact, the 1650 Ti is more of a mid-range card rather than a really high-end fast GPU, and it's really meant to accelerate programs that require GPU accelerations like Premiere or Resolve or any other applications that would take advantage of the extra CUDA cores. But other than that, it's not really a gaming beast. The reason why we're doing some gaming benchmarks is to just show you the fact that it has a little bit of horsepower to play some titles at respectable frame rates. So that's just something that you definitely need to keep in mind. If we see how the processor reacts in gaming over time, temperatures and clock speeds are managed a lot like when we hit the system with a full CPU load. That means a huge spike in temperatures and frequencies at first, followed by an epic dip, and then everything pretty much levels off again. The only difference here is since all the cores are partially loaded, 3.8 GHz was the overall average. As for the 1650 Ti, well, for the first 30 seconds, I was a bit worried with those high temperatures, but like we saw in the last test, that's the time it takes for the fans to actually realize that they need to turn on. I really think Dell needs to change this. I mean, look, I'm testing it in the highest performance mode, and it would be so much better if the fan algorithm was load-based instead of it being so slow to respond. That way temperatures could be managed before they get high, and maybe clock speeds won't fall off a cliff for a few seconds. Once things finally stabilized, the GPU is running right within NVIDIA's specs at under 80 degrees, so there's nothing to worry about here. So how does that translate into actual gaming results? Well, the XPS 15 might be sitting at the bottom of the charts, but in a few cases, it actually comes within 5 to 7% of the Bravo 15 from MSI with an RX 5500M. So basically, I classified this as a good fit for medium level gaming. Don't expect ultra details, but if you turn down the settings a bit, you'll get playable frame rates in almost any game at 1080p or the XPS 15's native resolution of 1920 by 1200. That's really not all that bad for a notebook like this. So I guess the question comes down to who is the XPS 15 catered towards? I think if you're someone who's into stock trading, or if you're someone who uses programs like MATLAB or Autodesk Maya, or applications that need just a little bit of GPU acceleration but also need some of that CPU horsepower without sacrificing on battery life, and you value design, build quality, and you just want a premium notebook for that, it's worth checking out because it's amazing. It really does excel in that department. But I do want to mention that I wouldn't blame anyone if they completely skip the XPS 15 because of all the issues that are really well known within the community, like the trackpad, the wobble issue, and of course people have issues with the display. Not to mention my friend had to go through the random BSODs and the freeze aspect as well, which again, these are all red flags, and that is definitely a quality control issue that Dell certainly has to address. Personally, I really want to ditch my Razer Blade 15 and switch over to the XPS 15 just because of the beautiful, bright, color-accurate display, the speakers, the trackpad, I guess the battery life, and most importantly, the fact that it's just built really well and it's so refined. There's just so many good things to like about the XPS 15. But I have to send it back. Dell wants it back, so there's that. I might end up buying one for myself, but anyways, I hope you were able to take something from this video. Let me know what you guys think about the XPS 15. I mean, even after all these issues, like, would you still actually consider picking one up? Curious to know. I'm Ivo with hardwarecanucks. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.